Good morning. Let's continue with Abraham's vision of the rise and fall of empires, how I titled yesterday's class. Based on the vision we read at this week, end of this week's Parsha, how Hashem, when he makes the covenant with Avram, he also shows him Merza, a vision of the challenges, but ultimately also the victory that would come in the future. So firstly, the dread and the great darkness that befalls Abraham when the sun sets, as Rashi says very briefly, but the Midrashim elaborate, because he showed him all the Goliaths, all the exiles, all the empires, namely the four major ones, which would oppress and the Jewish people, also those that would destroy the Beis Hamikdash, Bavel, and Rome, namely. And then continues in the actual verse about Mitzrayim, which is the Reish Kol HaGolius, in the Medrash it says, is the head, the beginning, and the central nervous system of all exiles. But then, Achri Ken Yotze B'Rechush Gadol, but afterwards they'll come out with great wealth, which means wealth on all levels, material, spiritual. And we cited the Zohar's, the Rebbe's answer to Rabbi Greenglass, the Piyut, the Medrash Yalkut Shmeini, and many other places in Daniel and others in the commentaries, the Barbanel, that all talk about this vision, how it plays itself out in history. And when we stand today, you still have the great empire of Rome is no longer Rome, and but it's the Western world, essentially a Christian world, born out of Rome, born out of Magdiel Zuremi, the child, the descendant and child and grandchild of Esav. You have basically the Middle East, which is all the Arab and Muslim countries. There are Arab countries that are not Muslim, there are Muslim countries that are not Arab, that essentially overall, not in specific you can trace, but they generally come from Yishmael, the son of Avram Avinu, and of course the Jewish people. This is what dominates a big part of the world. Now you may ask, what about the Far East, the Chinese, the Japanese, Asia, India, half the population of the world? So there are different theories where they originate from, whether they're from the children of Ram or they're the children of Noach for sure, because everyone originates from the children of Noach. Some say they come from Yafos. There's also Africa, of course. Some say that comes from Chum. I don't want to go into it right now, but keep in mind that Buddhism, which is one of the major theologies of the Far East, is essentially talks about Brahman, and there have been books written how the teachings of Buddhism so parallel many of the mystical teachings in Kabbalah. So in Parsha Chayei, which we'll read in 2 weeks, it talks about how after Sarah passes away, Avram goes back to Keturah, who's Hagar, and has children, and sends those children to the east with names, with holy names. Shemus Hatuma, it says they're impure names, but they're divine names, meaning powerful names, and many attribute the wisdoms of that part of the world coming also ultimately from Avram. But again, it's not the point of this discussion here. The point is that Avram Avinu basically shaped the world in every possible way. So even today, the battles that are being fought, if you really want to understand them, go back to the roots. And that is what we're discussing. They begin in this week's Parsha. Now again, I wrote a lot about this, I'm telling you extensively, back in 9/11, but then again, in the last few years, because it always keeps popping up, the Middle East doesn't go away. So if you really want to have a good overview, all you have to do is type into our AI, which is simonjacobson.ai, or now it's on the website. You could just type in, or WhatsApp. We put it also on WhatsApp. I don't know if you've seen that. You could just type it into our WhatsApp question, sum up an overview of your discussions on the roots of the wars in the Middle East, or the battles, and you'll get a whole summary, plus if you ask for links to articles where you could have sources and It's very easy today. You don't even have to do a search on our website. You could just have AI do the search for you and ask for the sources, and you'll have a comprehensive picture of everything I discussed. I'm just summing it up in this conversation. What I want to do now is a part 2 to that, which is to go a little bit more into what exactly were the battles. The battles that we see today, many people are very mystified, most people. What exactly are they fighting about? Why does Iran call for the destruction of Israel? Why could the Arab and Muslim world not just accept a little sliver of land that let Jews live there after how much they've suffered? They're coming back to their homeland. What's bothering them? They have thousands of times more land, plenty. It's not like they're lacking territory. Why did they attack Israel in 1948? And then again later, and then 1967, and the Yom Kippur War, and this. What is it that they want? What can they just let the Jews be at peace? Nobody really has an answer to this question. There's the propaganda answers, but what is the true answer? And again, if you go back to the roots, you'll find the answer. And I'm going to discuss that now. And this also gets into, of course, the issue that these battles didn't begin today. They began in the house of, or the tent of Avraham Avinu. You see immediately that Yishmael and Yitzchak have tensions, to the point that Sarah tells Avraham to send away Yishmael and Hagar. And then again, when Yitzchak and Rivka give birth to Yaakov and Esav, the twins, they too are not at peace. Even in the pregnancy, they're already struggling, the twins. And what does the pasuk say? Lu'umalum yematz. When Hashem explains to Rivka why she's having a difficult pregnancy, he says, you have two nations inside of you. This is not a medrash. The verse itself says, two nations that are struggling. When one will rise, the other will fall. So you see that the battles of the nations didn't begin today, or even 1,000 years ago. They began almost 4,000 years ago. Yishmael, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Esav. So again, respectively, the ancestors of these three, they call the major religions: Judaism, Christianity, Islam. So what exactly were they fighting about? Even that is not so clear. When you read the Torah, what was the problem with Yishmael and Yitzchak? Why did Sarah send his son? Why was he a bad influence? He was a son of Avraham Avinu. He was circumcised. Avraham taught him his principles. What exactly? I mean, you could find it in hints, like we read yesterday, that he was a wild man. But what was the confrontation between him and Yitzchak? And later Yishmael does tshuva. He comes back and respects Yitzchak when they come to bury Avram. Esav and Yaakov also reconcile, not completely, but definitely to some extent. So what's the story behind the story, basically? When you can understand that, you can then apply that to the generations that would come as nations grew out of these individuals. Namely Avram, of course, Yitzchak, Ishmael, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Esav. And as I mentioned yesterday, they don't go away. By Matan Torah, God is approaching the children of Yishmael and the children of Esav to offer them the Torah. And then a little close to 1,000 years later, or a little more than that, is the birth of Christianity from the children of Rome, Esav. 7 centuries after that, 6-7 centuries after that, is the birth of Islam in the world of the Arab world, which is the children of Yishmael. And here we go. So you have the story of history. So let's get back to the root, and I'll go back to my research that I did back after 9/11. So the first thing I did was I was wondering what is shaping, and this is how I'll explain it this way. We'll work our way backwards. What is shaping the minds of a person like Osama bin Laden, who was behind, of course, the 9/11 attacks? He was born into wealth and power, Saudi Arabian rich family, aristocratic, went to the best schools, like many of them go to Western universities. So he's not like some social misfit, living in poverty, angry. What was driving him to do exactly that? Why do they call the United States the big Satan, the great Satan? Israel, the small Satan? Why do they use terms like, you hear the Zionist crusader conspiracy against the Muslim world? Zionism, crusader. Zionism, of course, Jewish, crusader is Christian. What is that correlation? And what lies behind all these battles, like I said before? So I wanted to research. So the first thing I remember reading, that the people, when they were profiling the hijackers that flew those planes into the World Trade Center and the other hijacks, the other planes, what they would start researching, where were they, what they do. So they traced and were able to retrace their steps to what were they, where were they the night before, in certain motel rooms, I think, around the Boston area, or even New Jersey. I don't remember exactly, because they did fly out from Boston, and they found literature. Now you would think the literature is how to hijack a plane, how to break open a cockpit, how to use box cutters to do whatever they wanted to do, and then of course how to fly a plane into a big tower. No, none of that. The literature they found was religious literature. And that we have the documents. I began to read them. They were in Arabic, but I found translations. They're reading different so-called prayers. If you read them, you would have no idea that these are people who tomorrow are going to cold-bloodedly fly into a plane, suicide mission, kill everyone they can kill, and wreak that all the havoc that they did. It's the spiritual prayers that you're connecting to God, that you are fighting God's purpose, that God wants to destroy the infidels of this world, namely in the Western world. You're going to go to heaven. What you're doing is fulfilling God's purpose. I don't want to call it lahavdil alaf avdolas, like reading Yom Kippur prayers, these type of prayers of connecting to Hashem. And within the documents, you also find references to who's writing this philosophy and who shaped their minds. Like I said, who shaped Osama bin Laden? And you suddenly I come to discover a man who's considered one of the fathers of contemporary Muslim fundamentalism. His name is Sayyid Qutb, Qutb is how you spell his last name, Sayyid Qutb. He was executed by President Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt in 1966 because he posed a threat. Nasser was more of what they call the pan-Arab, more secular Arab Muslim states. And he represented a very fundamentalist strain within Islam. And there was a threat to him, so he ended up being executed. However, he created a whole following. He has students, a scholar. He wrote, I believe, a 70 or 80 volume commentary on the Quran. The Quran is the Islam Bible. He's considered a scholar. And he has these many, Osama bin Laden and others attribute to him being their mentor and their guide, their spiritual leader. So I decided to do some reading on him to see what does he say. So here's a summary. Sometimes you have to read the enemy's writings to understand where they're coming from. So it's not exactly always so, let's put it this way, life-affirming. However, like it says about the Sanhedrins, allowed to learn the laws of Avodah Zarah and idolatry, even though you're not allowed to learn those laws because they have to know what it is to make a halacha, psak, if something is idolatry or not. You have to know. You can't just talk. It's like a doctor has to know the disease. So I decided to do some reading. And here is a summary of this man's philosophy. And you can see how compelling it is, how it can influence young, impressionable, passionate minds that are looking for purpose in the Muslim world. Now, this you're not going to hear very often. No one writes or talks about these things. We only talk about the symptoms, the results, but like what lies behind it. If you were able to have an intelligent conversation with one of these radicals, are you just going to be talking to a lunatic, to a criminal? Yes, they are criminals and of the worst type, savages, as we've seen. But is there some philosophy? So here is briefly what he writes. It's quite chilling, actually. So you can brace yourself. But nothing explicit here, nothing inappropriate, but chilling nevertheless. He writes as follows, that God created the world with a purpose. The purpose is to transform the material world into a divine home. Recognize that concept? Okay, so far so good, right? And, however, it's a world that has challenges and choices, human choices, between good and evil and right and wrong. And then he chose a people among all the nations of the world called the Jewish people. He follows the Bible, the Jewish people, to lead the way in implementing this mission. And Abraham is, of course, the man, the first to really follow what God wants. The Jewish, and he would have children and grandchildren and so on. The Jews, again, very in brief, the Jews messed up. They did not do it the job. They became corrupt themselves, became sinners, transgressed. So then God chose another person. Name is Jesus, Yashke, what we call, among the Jews, to come bring this message and start a new movement called Christianity, the New Testament, and to do the mission that the Jewish people failed to do. And he also failed. They also failed. They became even more corrupt, very power hungry, the Romans, and it became ego-driven, and religion was corrupted further. So then finally God chose Muhammad in the 6th century. He chose Muhammad and said, here's another nation that I'm choosing, the children of Yishmael, and through Muhammad the prophet, and they will do the job that the Jews and the Christians failed to do. However, the Christians and Jews don't go away. They are opposing because they represent the forces of material corruption. So what do we do with them? So we need to go to war, and he calls it jihad. I mean, it's not his original word, but jihad. And war is not just ideological war, even if it requires a physical war. And that's what Muhammad did. He ultimately, and his students, began to wage war against the Christians that were dominating in that area, especially in Northern Africa and Spain and the Middle East as well. Because remember, who controlled, let's say, Israel or those countries? After the Roman Empire came the Byzantine Empire, and that's when the Ottoman Empire rose, which is a Muslim empire, Muslim Arab empire, and began to conquer. The mosques that you see on Temple Mount, which we'll talk about shortly, are all from the Ottoman Empire. So, and then you had the battles going on, waged in the, basically going from the 7th century on, in that part of the world, between the Muslims, the Christians, and the Jews were always the minority. They were always in the middle somewhere, but they were at the mercy of both of them, sometimes under Muslim control, sometimes under Christian control, especially in Northern Africa and Spain, which changed hands many times. Bottom line is, Kitab continues that that's what we need to do, and we are fighting for the gods, for God. That's why they constantly refer to God. Allah Akbar, they keep saying, that Allah is great. And they say it specifically when they murder and kill, because it's all about God. Kitab came to the United States, I think in 1961 or 62, the early 60s, and he visited two of our great masterpieces, Hollywood and Broadway. Broadway in New York, Hollywood in California. And it confirmed all his fears, how corrupt and how decadent the Western world has become. Money, power, sexuality, everything that's antithetical to godliness. So for that like sealed the deal that the Western world is anti-God, and we, the Muslims, are the ones that have to bring God into the world. It's not about murder, it's not about killing, it's not about blood. And that's what he writes and teaches. So you can imagine Osama bin Laden growing up in wealth and privilege and education, but he's a young man with a lot of passion, doesn't have a purpose, starts reading this, it's unbelievable. It's giving him a sense of purpose. And it makes sense. The Western world is evil. Like, think of them like Amalek, what we would call Amalek. And you have to wipe them out or subjugate them. That's in brief the story. And the people who went and hijacked the planes are reading these documents. This is what they've been indoctrinated with a whole philosophy. And it's not about, they're not killing anyone, they're not hijacking planes, they're not flying them into buildings. They're doing the work of God. And it says clearly, don't focus, don't think it's death, it's killing. You're simply bringing God's message to the world. I'm not getting now into the psychological brainwashing here and how you can, but you know what? Every person is impressionable. And this is what, so I started reading all of this. Now, I just will add one more thing. When you start, based on all of this, you could say, okay, Kitab may be misplaced, but you know what? He seemingly has an argument. Obviously, not to call for killing, but you know where he really reveals himself is when he starts talking about Jews. His anti-Semitism is beyond the pale. You can see this hatred for Jews. You know, I'll just give you one line. He says the Jews are always a slave mentality. Since they've been in Egypt, they've always had slave mentality. You know, it's the exact opposite to what Jews are like. But that was his, I guess he was brainwashed as well. But that's not so relevant to our conversation, except that you're talking about, obviously, driven by a lot of hatred and so. But he was clearly a philosopher. However, that makes it only even more chilling, like I said, even more obscene, because he turned it into a whole philosophy. So when you start understanding that, you also start understanding some very fundamental things. Why is there a mosque, 2 mosques on the Temple Mount? Jerusalem isn't even mentioned in the Quran. Why are there 2 mosques on the Temple Mount? I understand in Mecca, in Medina, in Saudi Arabia, where they have the center where that's their holy land. They pray toward there, and they make pilgrimages there because Muhammad lived there. But what do they want in Jerusalem? Yes, they have a tradition that Muhammad went to heaven on the stone, what we call the Evan Ashiyah, that's called the Dome of the Rock, etc. The answer is the same reason there's a mosque in Bethlehem, which is a Christian city, if anything. It's a Jewish city, but associated with Christianity, because for them, the symbolism was that is what God wants. That wherever there was a Jewish holy site or a Christian holy site, we will build a mosque. The reason Israel is a problem for them is not the size of the land. It's even if it's 1 inch. Israel is a desecration to Muslim theology because it means that God is not controlling that whole part of the world. God through Islam. And their whole philosophy is based on that Islam replaced Christianity and Judaism. So the fact that Jews control that land, to them is a desecration of the worst sort. That's why it's irrational, because it's a religious passion. It has nothing to do with, it's not that they want a little more land, or because their resources, gold, silver, oil, which there isn't anyway, or because it's a beautiful land. It's simply because it is the promised land, promised to Abraham. They know that. But from their belief, it went to Yishmael, not to Israel, because Jews messed up. So for them, it's a desecration. Once you understand that, it takes a whole different take on what's going on here. And the Western world, especially in the United States, refuses to accept that it's a religious war, because we think religious wars are over 200 years ago. That was the whole point of the Enlightenment, that now we're a free society, we're not trapped in the old tribal and primitive views, but it's not true. That place is completely tribal and completely religious. I'm not saying they're all religious people, but religious beliefs, look what happens 5 times a day when they pray. Everyone goes to pray. I mean, there are secular Muslims, obviously, but the big part of that part of the world, and that's how their leaders control them. So understand these religious beliefs, which no one talks about, is really what lies behind it all. Now, there is a solution for that. We'll talk about that in a moment. But I want to go back. Now, so where are the roots of this in Abraham's tent? Meaning, namely, the battle between Yishmael and Yitzchak. Where do you see this? So here we need a little Chassidus to help illuminate the picture here. Remember, both Yishmael and Yitzchak are children of Avram Avinu. They both have Avram's DNA. The mother is the difference, Hagar and Sarah. So what did Avram embody? He embodied chesed. That's what Chassidus says. Avram is chesed. Yitzchak is gevura. Yaakov is tiferes, compassion. Avram is chesed. And we see in his life the open tent, inviting guests. Read about it next week. In general, him and Sarah showed chesed as they were spreading the word of God everywhere, but they did it with kindness. They would invite people, and then introduce them to God. So chesed. So of course, Yishmael and Yitzchak were influenced by that chesed. But chesed, like Chassidus says, there's chesed of Kedusha and there's chesed of Klippa. What's the difference between the two? Love is love. Love seems to be beautiful. Love and kindness. But like everything in life, everything has to be measured and disciplined. If there's chesed without a measure of gvura and discipline, it could be just as destructive as gvura without chesed. So if you compare, let's say, water to chesed, which we do, mayim, and fire to gvura, so water and fire are both necessary elements in life. However, with measure. If there's too much fire and it's not controlled, it creates destruction. What about water? The same. If water is not channeled, it floods and is destructive in the worst possible way. Tsunamis, floods. We read about the flood last week. So everything has to be measured. So the love of chesed, take it more psychologically, if you're a parent and you love your children, you could also kill them with love, overwhelm them with love. They become spoiled and entitled with love. You spoil someone when you give too much love. So love has to be measured. That's why we have gvura sheba chesed, as we speak about during Sfiras HaEmer, or in general, the iskalulus. In tohu, chesed of tohu, yes, is overwhelming. That's why the containers shatter. So chesed needs to be measured in a disciplined way, with bittul. If not, it becomes equally, it can be arrogant chesed and arrogant love, crosses boundaries, and that's when you find parents suffocating children. Anywhere where you see somebody with a lot of love and very aggressive, if it's not measured according to the kelim of the recipient, it can be very destructive. So chesed, that's why gshamim, rain, is called gvuras geshamim. But geshem is rain, water, it's chesed. Why is it called gvuras geshamim? As in gvura, because it comes down in raindrops. The Gemara in Tainis talks about Cheni Hamagel, when they were praying for rain during a famine, and he finally got the rain to come, but it came down in buckets and was flooding the fields. And he had to make a second prayer, do a second prayer to say to God, Reiv Teva Eini Yechem Lekabel. Too much good we cannot receive. Please give it to us in measure. And once it comes down in drops, it could be absorbed by the earth, drop by drop, instead of destroying the earth. Like if you see, try to pour too much water on the earth, it'll destroy the seed, it'll destroy the earth and everything. So everything has to be done with measure. And that's what Yishmael was lacking. It was a chesed without limits. Pera Adam, Yodeh Bakoel V'yad Kol Boy. The intentions may have been good, but it was overwhelming. And ultimately, it becomes arrogant. It's called chesed de klipa. So there's definitely elements of goodness in it. It was coming from Avram, but it was destructive. And a perfect example is this. There's a story, lahavdil, but it's a good example. The story in the Gemara in Shabbos, where Rashbi, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, and his son Rabbi Elazar have to escape the Romans because they're searching them out because Rashbi said certain things that were against the government, and they saw that as treason, and they wanted to kill him. So they went to hide in a cave. Famous story. They were hidden in a cave, miraculously survived for 12 years until the decree was over, or whatever happened. The king died, I'm not sure. Bottom line is 12 years end. You could imagine Rashbi and his son Rabbi Elazar, 12 years separated from civilization, became extremely refined. What did they do all day? They learned Torah. They're extremely spiritually refined. The Gemara says, as they came back and returned to civilization, whatever they started seeing the pettiness and the nonsense of the superficial lives of so many people, focusing on materialism, on short-term instant gratification, etc. So whatever Rashbi looked at began to burn. whether it means literally or figuratively. Bottom line, his powerful spiritual energy was literally consuming everything he looked at because he couldn't tolerate it. Hashem says to him, I didn't take you out of the cave. I didn't create this world for it to be destroyed. I created l'sheves yitzara, lo l'sayuvara, l'sheves yitzara. I didn't create the world for it to become destroyed. I wanted to be settled, to civilized. And he sends Rashbi back one more year into the cave, this time willingly, not because of a decree. One more year, a bar mitzvah year, I like to explain it, to mature even further, that this time when he came out after 13 years, the Gemara says, whatever he saw that was broken, he fixed. Very different approach. Whatever was ill, he healed. He became a healer instead of a destroyer. Now, which Rashbi was a greater level? The first one, you could say, wow, he's so intense. He can't tolerate anything that is anti-God. Or the second one, where he learns how to repair it. Obviously, the second one is higher because it's coming into a corrupt world, and instead of fighting it or destroying it, you're finding ways to repair it. Tikkun of Tayu, not destruction of Tayu. In a way, it's a subtle difference, it's a subtle example. In a similar way, chesed of Klippa needs to be harnessed toward repair. The idea of aggression, that the way to correct a decadent world, let's even say it's all true, that the Western world is decadent and corrupt. The way to do so is through chesed. And we see it from Avram himself. What did he do next week's Parsha when he sees Hashem tells him he's going to destroy the infidels, the wicked city of Sodom and Gomorrah? So you would think he should celebrate. Finally, justice, in a world like ours, you always see the wicked prosper. Finally, God is going to destroy the wicked. Avram doesn't do that. Avram prays for them. He says maybe there's 50 tzaddikim. And how could the judge of the world not be just? Hashefet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat. Now he wasn't trying to justify their crimes. He was just trying to find some compassion. Because instead of just burning it up and destroying it, let's find a way to repair it. Let's get them to do tshuva. However one explains it. And that is, so Yishmael learned from Avram the passion to bring God to the world, but what was lacking was the maturity of doing it in a disciplined way. Yitzchak, on the other hand, is Gvura. So he's the Gvura that tempers the chesed and channels it properly. That's why Sarah said, send away Yishmael. He was a bad influence on Yitzchak in many ways. But spiritually, psychologically, emotionally, this was the key to it all. I find it interesting. This is my own little addition here. I find it interesting. We pray 3 times a day, 4 times on Shabbos and Yom Tov, and only once a year, 5 times on Yom Kippur. My theory is, I don't know, maybe I heard it somewhere, I don't even know, that Muhammad must have walked into a shul in Saudi Arabia somewhere on Yom Kippur. Because in Islam, they pray every day 5 days, and they're constantly bowing. We do that only on Yom Kippur. So maybe Muhammad thought that that's what we do every day. However you explain it, you do find that Yishmael and Hagar were good at prayer. They prayed to Hashem when they are in need. So prayer is a beautiful thing, but again, with measure. Because religious fervor, for all its qualities, if it's not measured, can be very destructive. These are called religious wars. It's called jihad. So what you see at the essence of it, I'm not saying every Muslim terrorist is aware of the chesed and gvura dynamic, but I will say that those are the roots that ultimately evolved into a destructive behavior. Now, on the other hand, Esav is also a destroyer, is a warrior. That's what the Torah says, Ish Milchama Yedei Sayed, a warrior, because he had gvura without the measure of the chesed. So that's a whole other story. Look at Christianity's violence through the centuries, the Crusaders, the Inquisition, in a horrendous way, how they tormented and tortured anyone that would not convert, anyone that was not Christian or Catholic, whatever. The point being is, I don't want to talk now so much about Esav, we're talking more about Yishmael, that you can start seeing and tracing the roots of events today Again, it devolved to a point where many people today are not aware of any of this. But it doesn't mean it doesn't have roots. So what is the ultimate answer? The answer is bittul. Chesed, to have an element of measure and discipline, needs bittul. Because your religious passion can become as arrogant as someone that's not religious, and then you become just as destructive. Like I said, water can be just as destructive as fire. And that is what is needed, the bittul. Avram had bittul, Yitzchak had bittul, and ultimately Yaakov really balanced it all, which we'll talk about maybe a later time. And that is the ultimate solution, that Rashbi came out the 13th year. Now he understood a whole new dimension, that all his power has to now be harnessed, has to be directed toward repair, toward fixing. So in a way, when the United States was born 250 years ago, by Christians, deists, however you define them, but it was definitely not Jews and it was from the Christian world. That's an example, as the Rebbe puts it, in Malchus Shel Chesed. He actually calls it Malchus Shel Chesed, because Chassidic Misa'elam, they learned to tame these extremes, and they learned it the hard way. Look at what Jefferson writes in the Declaration of Independence, that the King George began to oppress us to the point that we have to untie ourselves from that oppression. Basically, the oppression of monarchs or religious leaders that dominated for centuries and didn't allow human beings to breathe. They ended up destroying in the name of religion. Look at the story of Christianity, of the Christians forcing Galileo to recant his discoveries, scientific discoveries. They did it through torture, through threats, because they saw that open inquiry as a threat to them. The United States was founded not far from perfect, but these are principles that all men are created equal, essentially that all human beings are created in the divine image, and as such have human rights, inherent, inalienable human rights. These are biblical principles that Avraham Avinu frankly taught. It just took thousands of years for the world to begin to embrace, but Christian world began to embrace another approach, which was far more civil and far more balanced. Unfortunately, it may have gone too far the other way, to the left, and it needs religion to balance it, because religion brings morality into the picture. Just free inquiry on science is amoral. But it did introduce it, and it needs a balance. The balance between a passionate faith in God, but also one that doesn't destroy the universe, one that's integrated. It's very much, again, I don't want to compare it because it's so distant, but very much the difference of the approach of Chassidus and other schools of thought. One is, how do you deal with a negative situation? Do you rebuke? Do you punish? Do you work with gvura and judgment? Or do you do it with chesed? So Rashbi taught us, the 13th year, that you have to do it with chesed. Your job is still to repair and make the world a divine place, but you need a proper balance between chesed and gvura. That's the key to it all. And when you don't have that, so Islam will have to go through its own market correction. Maybe that's too mild of a word, but that's the idea, that it too can embrace its roots in Yishmael and Avram, but tamed. No problem to believe in God, and passionately so, but not to destroy. That's why many of the videos I've done, one of them actually, if you recall, right after October 7th, I did a video called Personal Message to My Muslim Cousins and Friends. What would Abraham say to you now? Abraham prayed for infidels. Why are you not behaving like your grandfather? Why are you trying to destroy them, even if you call them infidels? So they will have to go through that correction of finding the bittul necessary. And if they don't find it on their own, we have to force it upon them. When I say force, I don't mean necessarily violently. The only reason we have to go to war is defense, because when you're dealing with people who are ready to kill you, with all that I've said now, we don't remain philosophical and theological when someone's about to kill you and has proven that they did kill in the worst possible way. So this is not minimizing at all what happened, the atrocities of October 7th, Shmini Atzeres, and even till this day, with the hostages and so on. But it is saying that the bigger picture is not just destroying these evil forces, but ultimately imposing, yes, imposing, just like the Allies imposed on Germany after World War II to change their education system, to know that now it's prohibited to teach Nazi ideology. And look, Germany and Japan, who were such enemies 80 years ago, have become now allies to the West and to Israel, with all their flaws, to do the same in the Muslim schools and the Arab schools, what they teach their children. You want to teach them God, by all means, but it has to have a chesed gvura balance, not hatred, not destruction, not darkness, not a cult of death, as they've become, which of course is the ultimate. When water, chesed, is uncontrolled, it becomes death. That's what it becomes, it destroys. That's what a flood does. So bottom line is that by putting all these pieces together, which all originate, as I said, in this week's Parsha and the coming weeks, because this week Yishmael is born, but the confrontations with Yishmael Yitzchak happen the next week's Parsha. And ultimately learning from that what we need to do today. So this is somewhat of a summary of what I've wrote about. Again, there's a lot of more sources that I've not quoted, and actual places you can look it up. If you want more on this, I shared how to do that. Easy to find it all on our site. I pretty much gathered together a lot of material. It's impossible to gather everything, but I would say quite a lot. And from there, you can move forward. I also have a series that I wrote during the Persian Gulf War, In Search of Eden, a lot about the Euphrates River, which is referred to as well in this Parsha. And, because the battles then were being fought in that region, in eastern Iraq, Iran. So that whole region is a place where Avraham Avinu originates. Avraham Avinu lived, basically, his journey begins in southeastern Iraq, of all places, and then travels northwest to Israel. So much to be said. Some of it I've unpacked. Hopefully you can use it, ten l'chacham v'yech kameid, and take it from here. And Rabbi, we should finally be zeicha to the end of the story, like it says, the end of the part in Zohar Parsha Vayera, that Yisrael Eisachel, with the coming of Mashiach, and where all this will come to peace, and the nations of the world will be transformed. They're not destroyed, transformed to the proper philosophy and theology as taught by Avraham Avinu in his pure form.
Amen. Amen. Amalek. Yeah. I think it would be great if you could write a piece. I mean, if you want, I would help you with it, because I think the battle, in a sense, what you're saying, like in a sense, like the crux of what the issue that Islam had with the Jews. I mean, yeah, the Jews have issues with the Jews too. Like, the whole Chumash is rife with, warnings about we kind of fell off the wagon type of thing. I think maybe if you could frame this, and I don't know if this is the way to do it, but if we could find the commonality with Islam, which it says itself, which is there's a battle going on today between secular humanism or secular belief and just belief in God. And maybe if you could frame it that way and make some of these points, it would open up a discussion.
I have engaged in different podcasts with certain Muslims who have that approach and attitude. I actually just communicated with one yesterday. And there is a minority of individuals, but you know what? There's a few things here. First of all, we're dealing with a war. There are people calling for the death of Jews, and they've actually proven that they have killed. So we can't just be naive and say, okay, let's just sit down. My talk here was between us. I would not sit down with Hamas and have this discussion with them, because they are Nazis.
They don't want to talk.
Let me just finish. So we have to deal with that part. There's another component, is what I addressed. So yes, those that have that ability, ultimately, in my opinion, if the Abraham Accords go the right way, this should be the conversations with countries like Saudi Arabia, where we do find that commonality, and they'll understand this. Where no one's trying to convert the Muslims to becoming Jewish or Christian. So yes, that's definitely the wave of the future. But right now, you have to show real strength to eliminate. Remember, the forces of Hamas and others don't want such conversations. They want to destroy anything that they don't that they feel is a threat. And I don't even think it's religious completely. I think they've
Yeah,
already turned into savages.
it's
I was just
power.
giving the religious underpinnings on
Hmm.
roots, but I don't think that this is just purely. I mean, that's what they tell their people. That's why they say Allah Akbar. But the things they did, burn children alive. I'm not going to get into all the atrocities. That goes already beyond. I'm just pointing out how it could be rooted in a subtle element of extremism, but then it gets out of control. I just wanted to make sure that we have this balance. That's all.
Simon, what you said is fascinating, but we have also another thing in Torah, which is a Molech, that it's clearly to be destroyed.
Well, according to most Mefarshim, Amalek has been already destroyed, and there's no more Amalek in the world.
So why are we supposed to remember? Why are we supposed to remember
Yeah, but the
and erase
concept.
them every day?
This is you don't know the answer?
No.
No, do you know the answer? The Rambam writes in Sefer HaMitzvahs that the mitzvah continues even if you don't have Amalek, because in concept, if they existed, we would have the mitzvah. So right now, like the same thing, there's a mitzvah to bring offerings in the Beis HaMikdash. The answer to that is you do it spiritually.
So we should just think about erasing evil in the world, even if you're saying Amalek doesn't exist?
No, Amalek represents suffix doubts. There's Amalek within each of our hearts and souls, coldness, aloof, apathy.
The
Just
Nazis
like, just like Mitzvah, just like the
I
Karbonis
see.
in the Beis HaMikdash.
A spiritual matter.
They can't do it physically; you do it spiritually. Like
But
Yetzias
the
Mitzrayim. How do we go out of? How do we go out of Mitzrayim?
Nazis are
Let me
not
just finish.
Amalek.
How do we go out of Mitzrayim every day? We go out of Mitzarim v'Gvulim, the limitations in our lives. So Amalek exists spiritually. That's the main Amalek, actually.
Asher
There was a time that there was an actual Amalek, but almost everybody holds that there's no physical Amalek anymore. The Nazis, I don't know. We don't know if they were Amalek or not. Halachically, figuratively, you could say they were like Amalek. They wanted to kill all the Jews. I mean, Haman came from Amalek, but that's back then. Anyway, the point being here, to just say Hamas is Amalek,
Your point
halachically, I wouldn't say that.
Hamas also?
What?
No,
What
he
you
said
said
it
just now
wasn't.
so beautiful. Is this also the attitude to Hamas and the Nazis and all of them?
No. Somebody's
to
coming.
bring peace?
Everything I said is not referring to someone who's coming with a knife or a gun to shoot you. That makes no difference. You can have all the religious the intentions. That's called pekuach nefesh. When you talk of danger, that makes no difference if they're religious or they're not religious. This pekuach nefesh takes over there. So I don't need to call them Amalek. To me, it's enough that they want to kill me, and that's it. Then you have to do everything possible to kill them first.
But what is the concept of
You don't
Amalek?
need the laws. One second. You don't need the laws of Amalek. You don't need the laws of Amalek to tell you to protect yourself from an enemy. My point is.
Okay, but the concept of Amalek in Torah is that
Why
there is pure evil.
What is the debate here? Whether they're Amalek or not? Who could be Kaveh? Only God can say that. Why do I have to call them
the
Amalek?
debate is what should be
Why not
the
just call them
attitude?
Why can't just call them enemies that you need to fight and destroy before they hurt you? That's all. That's, to me, that's just as strong. Anyway, that's my thoughts.
I think I hear what I don't know. I hear what Rabbi Teichel is saying. He's saying if there is an element.
Are we saying that every person who wanted to kill Jews is called Amalek?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not saying that. I think that if they behave like Amalek, if they.
But that's not halachic conversation. It doesn't say anywhere that when someone behaves like Amalek. We're talking about pekuach nefesh. The law is very straightforward. Somebody comes to you individually or collectively wants to kill you, God forbid, you need to kill them before they kill you. Simple. You don't need to use any Amalek, anything like that. There's no need for it. So I'm trying to be very, true to the sources. You want to say in your imagination it's like an Amalek, that's fine. But you don't have necessarily a source for that, and it's fine either way. I mean, it's to me semantics. How does it help if we call them Amalek?
Well, I didn't get a chance to finish making my point. It seems like a lot of in almost all aspects of Chassidus, the notion is not just erasing evil but transforming it. And I think that was part of what you were saying. The message is, aside from those who are coming to kill us, that the conversation needs to be about, like you said, a balance, a tiferet, and not the destructive chesed. But there seems to be in Torah the notion that there is a type of evil that just needs to be simply erased. It's not redeemable. It's coming from klipa. It's just bad news, and there's no conversation to be had.
And that is why I'm so adamant to say there's no Amalek today, because that was done. It was a one-time thing, and it was achieved. That's exactly why I'm saying what I'm saying. You can't start applying it to every given situation unless God tells you to do so. That's exactly why it's dangerous to start calling people Amalek, because with that attitude, you have to then say, wipe out every man, woman, and child in the Muslim world.
I didn't say that. Hold on. I didn't say that.
I didn't say you said that. But if you're going to call somebody Amalek, there are guidelines. So therefore, I want to stay away from the calling of Amalek. It's a one-time thing that happened. There was a nation that was so corrupt that even you see Haman, he was left as a child and he ended up almost destroying the Jewish people. And that's that. It happened once. But now, according to, as I said, all or almost all, there is no halachic Amalek. There's spiritual Amalek, just like there was always a spiritual Amalek. That's the main thing that I said.
According to that, when you have the terrorists that made October 7, right now they are in jail, and they are not an immediate threat, they should not be killed?
One second. Why are they not an immediate threat? They are an immediate threat. That's why they're in jail. Anyway, why are we talking about this? Completely not the subject matter. You're asking me whether the people who killed Jews on October 7th should be given the death penalty. Right? I don't know. Halachically you're asking, or according to Israeli law? According to American law? I can't answer that question. Halachically, Bezdin doesn't control Dina de Malchusa Dina these days. So we don't put people to death, right? It's not like a Sanhedrin. So we don't have that power. So we don't put people to death. Is it the right thing to do? That's already a question for either Israeli law or international law. I can't answer that question. You want to say your opinion, my opinion? We could have opinions on it. Some people will say absolutely, to deter them from doing it again. But it's not the discussion of even if you go establish their Amalek, do we have the power today, halachically, to go kill people, men, women, and children, because we categorize them as Amalek? I don't know if you could say that. What Yitzchak was addressing, the concept of eradicating everything and not just transforming. Now remember, Amalek they incited it. They attacked the Jews when they came out of Egypt. But Amalek is definitely a one-time exception. It's not an approach in Judaism. You will not find anywhere in Jewish history, besides Amalek, where Jews came in and just slaughtered men, women, and children, according to God's mandate. Even Loisachaya Kol Neshama in Canaan, basically, after they came to Israel, there's the whole halachas about that too, which it's really a different subject altogether. But if you want to address that, I also have 2 articles on that called Religious Violence, with a whole discussion about the references in Torah that speak about where the Torah says, to these type of seemingly what they call ethnic cleansing or killing just everybody.
But after October 7, there was a whole big thing if Israel should go in and destroy everyone there in the beginning.
What does this have to do with our conversation?
No, because many people said that there are many women and children that they didn't do anything. I think Al Pi Torah, They had to be destroyed, maybe because of pikuach nefesh, maybe not Amalek, but it has to be destroyed. In Torah, there is a concept that if somebody killed, must be killed. Okay, that was during the time of Beis.
So we just
But
spoke about
today's
pikuach
safety.
nefesh. Listen, the Rebbe's response to that would be the military, like the doctors, have to decide that. That's a question, not a political question, whether what is needed to protect innocent people. Sometimes, yeah. The only way to protect innocent people is, unfortunately, you kill the enemy, but the enemy is embedded among innocents. What do you do then? So these are legitimate questions, but these are laws of pikuach nefesh, not laws of Amalek.
Could be. Why Moshe Rabbeinu, when he had a war against Sichon, he killed men, women, and children and animals? That they were not Amalek.
Who says you can apply that?
Told him, because he told him at that time. It was one time a request from God.
If it's
that is absolutely correct. You can't just do it. You can't just apply whatever you like from the Torah to a given situation. Pikuach nefesh, we all understand. I don't know why you need to go further than that.
When Yeshua came into Eretz Yisrael, Moshe
I don't know
Rabbeinu
how do you know you can apply that to this situation? How do you know you can apply that here?
It said in Chumash, Hashem told Moshe
How do you know you
Rabbeinu, when you're coming into Eretz Yisrael, and when Yeshua
So how do
came
you know
in,
you could? So you're saying that they should kill every Arab and Muslim in Eretz Yisrael?
No, when there is a
Why
war
not?
and they
Why
are a
not?
threat, like now in Hamas.
No, they're
and
all a
there's
threat. You don't
question
know.
if
You don't know
should
who's
do
a threat,
something
who's
or
not.
not.
Anyway,
And if
we're
not,
going in
we will
circles
be
here.
killed.
You cannot just apply randomly whatever you like from Torah to a given situation today. Pikuach nefesh, by all means, that's all you can really do.
Rabbi, I found a very interesting thing about the development of your teaching today. Just in this moment, you develop it in a much more broad application. Why? Because at that time when I read it, I thought the most precious germ in your teaching is that the war is not an actual war, but the spiritual war. And whatever we are doing, we have to realign with our spiritual world war at the beginning, from the spot as a foundation. Today, I found another very great idea about that Hasidim can be, you said it's a very loose comparison between Hasidim and other movement in Judaism, and how we deal with evil, not just destroy it, but transform it in a way that it would be even a greater asset for us. And this is the second thing. The third thing that I heard today, really remarkable, the whole tactic, the whole the war that we are doing right now is the balance between, yes, we have to do what we have to do, what military is supposed to give us perspective, but at the broader perspective, we cannot eliminate evil by ourselves. It's God plan. He can do it only. He only can destroy Hamas. And even if we will eliminate this particular Hamas activist, there would be another typical. That's why for us, it's not just the blood that we request to have instead of our murdered people, but how we balance it in with the spiritual aspect in this war is a key point. That's why
Okay.
I just heard from you how you develop. Maybe I didn't hear it before, but today I heard you actually develop your teaching even further.
Okay, thank you. That sounds accurate to what I said, what you just said. Yeah. Okay. Are there any other questions? Did you, Yitzchak, say everything you wanted to say, or did I cut you off?
No, not at all. I did some research on ChatGPT while everyone was talking, and it seems to say everything you said with sources about how the halakhic poskim have agreed, or that there is no remnant of Amalek. It's more of a spiritual concept that the mitzvah exists. It exists, but there's no nation to point your finger at.
Right. And even if it did exist, who has the right to identify who they are?
Yeah, no, for sure. I get it. It just, I mean, it seems, I don't know. In my
As
mind,
I said, because
yeah.
listen, we got to stay away from, emotional. What's the word? Temptation to what's the word? Demonize. To me, Pikuach Nefesh is stronger than anything, and when you're dealing with literally savages or Nazis or whatever you want to call them, or worse, you know exactly what you have to do. You don't need anything more than that. Anyway,
But yeah, I just wonder if there's no, like, if it's not Moradic, that when there is a nation that is, I don't know, I guess you can't say I guess Amalek, one of the essence of Amalek was to defy God, and I guess you could say even radical Muslims are theoretically, so they say,
that's
about.
not correct. Amalek is a genetic DNA thing called Amalek. It's not about defying God. Many people defy God. This whole secular world defies
No,
God.
no. I'm just saying that was something about them. That was that they wanted.
Yeah, but the
They
whole
wanted.
secular world defies God. You can't call that Amalek. That's not the definition of Amalek.
Yeah, but the whole secular world, well, most of it doesn't want to kill Jews, at least
That's
like
not true. What
Amalek.
about every anti-Semite? Why don't you just say if you want? But you didn't just say defy God. You said to kill Jews. That's
Both.
not the definition of
Put it.
Amalek. To kill Jews. Anyway, why do you feel you have to insist on creating an Amalek? That's what I'm asking.
I'm just suggesting. Look, you're the expert, and you're the gadol. I'm just a student, so I'm not trying to argue with you. I'm suggesting that there is a principle in Judaism that if there is a nation that is so arrogant as to defy God and to want to kill Jews at the
Okay,
same time.
that premise is incorrect. That's not Amalek. What you just said.
Well, I understand.
Amalek.
I understand there's a genetic component. It's a people. It's a race. It's a nation. I understand your point, and I'm saying beyond that, it seems to me there's a meta message that is part and parcel with a spiritual message that we don't have to try to transform people that want to kill us
That's
and want
because
to.
of pikuach nefesh. That's because they're dangerous, and you have to defend yourself. Has nothing to do with Amalek. That's
So what?
simply
Okay,
because.
so what do you say about this global jihadism? They want to conquer the whole world. They want to either kill you or force you to swear your allegiance to their version of God. I mean, you say
What are you
pikuach
asking me?
nefesh.
What did you ask me? If they're a direct threat, pikuach nefesh, and they're threatening you, or there's
I'm
enough
saying,
reason.
what do you
Then
suppose the Jewish response is to
I
radical
just
Islam and jihadism?
I just gave my whole talk on that. My
Not
answer is
really.
very straightforward. It's a
Yeah.
very simple answer. If there's an immediate threat or even a doubt of a threat, you need to go to war and do whatever it takes to protect yourself. If there isn't, and you're able to find people to speak to, and there's an
So you're
ability
saying,
to.
so I apologize for interrupting you, but maybe you're missing my point. You're saying that the
Anyway, I just gave
traditional.
a whole talk on it. What should I say?
No,
But go ahead.
well, okay, but we're extending it to a more tactless point. The implications of everything you've said is that unless a Muslim is coming chasing after me with a knife.
I didn't say that. I said even if there's a doubt, if they declare war on you, you have to put your guard up and make sure you're ready to do whatever it takes to protect you. They don't have to come with a knife at you. You don't have to wait for October 7th to know they want to kill you. They already said it before. That's why Israel preempted and attacked Iran. They didn't have to wait.
I think I'm just give me a chance to articulate my question. I'm saying there is this thing called radical Islam, and they are on a global jihad to convert the world to their radical version of Islam. And you either submit, which is another word of Islam, submission, where they're twisted, disgusting version of bittul. Okay, either you do that or they'll kill you. There's a whole movement. There's a global movement to convert the entire world or kill the entire world. And I'm saying that I think Judaism teaches that from the lesson of Amalek, that you don't just let that kind of mentality hover out there in the world, whether they've got a specific plan to kill Jews or not, that we as Jews should formulate a responsive strategy, just like Qatar is spending billions and billions and billions of dollars brainwashing the minds of Americans to hate Jews and want to destroy Israel. You can say, okay, so well, they're not exactly having an attack strategy. They're not exactly planning to kill Jews any particular moment. No, but they're setting up the whole world to do that.
So what do you propose? So what do you propose?
Counterattack strategy.
What do you propose? To go after Qatar like Amalek?
Well, I'm not saying we should go bomb Qatar, but
now tell me, what do you propose? You just made a case that there are people like that. So what do you propose according to the Torah? Should we treat them like Amalek and go kill all men and women and children?
I think we should label the whole country of Qatar a terrorist regime. They should be sanctioned and banned. They shouldn't be allowed to participate in our economy. We should go to war against them without guns. We should cut them off.
But what you just said you don't require the use of the word Amalek. That should be just like Hamas is labeled terrorist. You're saying Qatar should be labeled terrorist, correct?
Yeah, so what's the Jewish principle for doing what I said? Pikuach nefesh?
What are you saying? Since when does Judaism have the power to declare Qatar as terrorist? That's up to America and the world to do. What are you saying? I'm not sure.
I'm saying I think Judaism has something to say about...
Who's Judaism? What's that? You're talking about the state of Israel? You're talking about
I'm talking about the Torah. I'm talking about the Torah.
The Torah does... Amalek, only God could designate who is Amalek. So no one else can do that. So that's not a way of going. You can't do that. That's number one. Okay? That's off the table. Now, what are you saying? That since we live in Golos, we don't have the power to control what the world will do. Yes, you could put pressure on the United States and try to label Qatar a terrorist country. I don't know. Is Iran called a terrorist country by America?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
Well, the regime.
Okay, but that to me is not a. Torah does not have. We're not in a Sanhedrin world where Torah designates countries as terror. I don't know such a precedent. I don't think it's our duty. Now, should we protect ourselves every way possible and fight them politically, economically, and so on? By all means. But I don't see it as a context of a halachic conversation, really.
Well, I guess what I'll let it go after this. I don't want to dominate the conversation, but you suggested you want to have a conversation with your Muslim friends. And by the way, I'm not anti-Muslim, God forbid. There's 1.8 billion Muslims in the world. It's about a quarter of humanity. So please, if whatever else who's listening to this, I'm not saying that. I'm saying there are people and most of them, please God, you could sit down with and have a peaceful discussion with. But there are those who you cannot have that with, who are determined to.
So we don't. We can't. If you can't, you can't. I'm with you.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't have a conversation, you can't have a conversation. Of course, I know.
I'm saying more than that.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Anything I said to try to have a conversation with people who you can't have a conversation with, I'm not even suggesting that.
Mm-hmm.
When I say a message on video, I'm hoping that there's some people that will. Those that can't are just not going to listen anyway, and they're going to respond with hate regardless, which is, of course, what I get. I'm not naive like that. So I'm not suggesting that. If I said it's a minority of a minority, and it's not the dominant voice, but I think with political pressure of the United States and Israel and strength, just as Germany also once you could not talk to them 80 years ago, and today you could. So my belief is if you put enough powerful pressure, the war is not just a war, a military war. It's also an economic one. As enough pressure and you don't compromise, you could get people come to the table. Now, who? That depends. I can't speak for everyone. I know there's some people forget about, but there's some people for political and economic reasons. You think the Emirates necessarily love Jews? But you know what? Their economic and political interests outweighed their hate, and they saw a lot of money and opportunity, so they went for it. Fine with me.
Yeah, I hear. But the Muslim Brotherhood is a different. It's people. It's
No,
what I'm
look,
suggesting.
that there is a that there is a Muslim fundamentalists, like I quoted Khattab and so on. Of course there are, and they are a threat. They are a threat. Look in Europe. Look what they're doing in Europe. So you have to do whatever you can to fight them. This started with a discussion whether you can label them Amalek and apply the laws of Amalek to them. That's what I negated. As far as the practical and pragmatic approach, Torah is very pragmatic. Yaakov Avinu prepares for war, he prays, and he prepares a bribe to appease Esau. That's the approach, Jewish approach. You do all three.
Yes, I hear.
So that's that. Yeah. Where I would criticize would be if you start trying to appease or trying to compromise yourself and not show the strength. Could very well be October 7th and everything that's ensued. Could also, they've exploited some of our weaknesses because we just want to negotiate when you can't negotiate with them. So to me, I don't need Amalek to tell you that Hamas you can't negotiate with. They're just impossible. And you have to go to total war. Even now, look what's going on. They're still dragging it on. So I think on a practical approach, like the Rebbe would say, he always used these words, Pekuach Nefesh, and who decides how to deal with Pekuach Nefesh is the military, not the politicians, like a doctor. So he never used the word Amalek, he never used any, he just said the Torah says, Simishin Chavtes, it's Pekuach Nefesh, and how do you deal with Pekuach Nefesh? You have to ask experts in that field. So, but don't bring political considerations and diplomatic stuff in a place of danger to life. And if that was followed from day one, I think we'd have a lot less problems today.
I hear.
That would be the Torah approach to all of this.
I found that, yes, Jacob was correct, and his strategy with three types of dealing with enemy, absolutely 100% correct. But before that, in another realm of reality, we inside of ourselves have to deal with us. Because when God said, if you will follow my directions, I will eliminate your enemy in one moment. Don't forget these words. Whatever you see right now would disappear. If you just imagine this picture and turn your efforts on yourself, on purifying, on do berurim in your society, that God will deal with your enemy. You don't need pikuach nefesh for the whole nation to deal with that.
Yeah. Yeah, but we still have to do our part in natural means, since we can't just sit down and pray. We have to prepare for war and fight the wars that are necessary, and then God will help.
Exactly. And as I said, Jacob was 100% right, and we have to follow his
I'll pass on to him that you agree with his approach.
No. I just listen of your teaching. That's it.
No, I understand. That was just a joke. Let's conclude. A lot was said here. first half of what we spoke about was the roots of these battles, and hopefully some of the solutions. And the second part we spoke about is Amalek and so on. All good conversation. I hope I didn't say anything that offended anyone. It's just we're all passionate about this, and I think you just have to clear mind where Torah comes in and where it applies. I think the Torah here is mostly a pekuach, not mostly, all pekuach nefesh issue here. But I gave some sources if you want to look up, and by all means, if you have further questions, we can discuss it. Okay, so let me end the